Elizabeth Warren is pivoting even further to the right in an appeal to become Joe Biden's vice president. Now, before I get to the contents of that story, let me give you a little backstory here, a little reminder. This is from back in November from the Boston Herald. Joe Biden's campaign slams Elizabeth Warren's plan to fund Medicare-For-All. So back in November, there was a squabble between Elizabeth Warren and Joe Biden over health care. At that time, Elizabeth Warren was still backing Medicare-For-All, even though she had a plan that centered a public option first, and then 3 years later would try to push for Medicare-For-All. Completely ridiculous plan in having two different political fights, two different healthcare fights over the course of 4 years, and think you could actually win both. Just a completely ridiculous plan. But still, she, at least rhetorically, supported Medicare-For-All, and Joe Biden attacked her for it. Well, Elizabeth Warren back then, back in November, this is how she responded.
The cost projections that we have on Medicare were authenticated by President Obama's head of Medicare. Our revenue projections were authenticated by President Obama's labor economist. And the employer contribution is already part of the Affordable Care Act that President Obama put into the Affordable Care Act. So if Joe Biden doesn't like that, I'm just not sure where he's going. We're building on Medicare for all. We're building on the Affordable Care Act. You know, Democrats are not going to win by repeating Republican talking points and by dusting off the points of view of the giant insurance companies and the giant drug companies who don't want to see any change in the law that will bite into their profits. But if anyone wants to defend keeping those high profits for insurance companies and those high profits for drug companies and not making the top 1% pay a fair share in taxes and not making corporations pay a fair share in taxes, then I think they're running in the wrong presidential primary.
So, pretty tough words from Elizabeth Warren back then on Joe Biden, saying that he's using Republican talking points, that he's fighting for giant healthcare companies and protecting their profits. But things have now changed as Elizabeth Warren, as it's become obvious over the past 6 months, and if it wasn't already obvious back in 2016, is clearly more focused or only focused on attaining power and doesn't really care about the actual issues or helping anybody. So this is the political headline right here. Warren pivots on Medicare-For-All in bid to become Biden's VP. She's pitching herself as a governing partner to Biden despite their past clashes over policy. All right, now first, something worth noting here when it comes to the headline and how this article is framed. The term pivoting. Pivoting, when it comes to the mainstream media, the way they use this word, this term, it's always about politicians moving to the right on policy, becoming more conservative. You almost never hear the term pivoting in trying to say how a politician should move to the left. Like, have you ever heard the media discuss how Donald Trump needs to pivot to the left in order to win? Has that been a term that's ever been uttered ever on television or any of these mainstream outlets? Never. Because pivoting is to the right in their view. And the reason it's that way is because these are mainstream media corporate outlets. These are massive institutions that have a corporate bias. So it's not even necessarily on the writer's fault, because it is this entire world, this entire outlook that is presented through mainstream media, that is presented as the normal way of thinking. The normal way of thinking is, well, a politician has to move to the right, has to become more conservative in order to win, even though none of the data supports that. They'll always point to the polls showing, well, if you look at the polling where people self-identify, most Americans self-identify as either moderate or conservative, not realizing or not pointing out the fact that people have different ideas of what terms like conservative, moderate, or liberal even mean. So to say that people self-identify as moderate or conservative doesn't mean anything, because you can poll those same people that think they're conservative or moderate, and they actually support policies like Medicare for All. In exit polling, every single state in the Democratic primary, the vast majority of voters backed Medicare for All in exit polling, even in states that Joe Biden won big over Bernie Sanders. And when you look at national polling on Medicare for All, across for all voters, not just Democrats, Medicare for All is still has a majority of support. And it is one of the few issues that has both conservatives and liberals or progressives on the same side of the issue. But that is almost never communicated in the media. And even apart from how popular it is, think of everything that the government normally does, be it Democrats or conservatives, like tax cuts for the rich. Do most Americans support tax cuts for the rich? No. But the media never points out the polling on that. They only are so focused on polling when it comes to these policies that will actually help people, like Medicare for All. And this is one case where the people are actually on the side of the policy. It's just the framing that the media puts on all of these issues is done in a way where, from the start, it puts you into this mindset where you're already not realizing that you're absorbing information through a certain worldview. Because if pivoting was used the way that it should be used, in the sense that it can mean pivoting to the right or the left, then you would see it used more often in terms of, hey, this politician should be pivoting to the left because more people support Medicare for All. More people want the wealthiest Americans to pay more in taxes. But you never see the term pivoting used in that way. Now, Politico quotes Elizabeth Warren here saying, "I think right now people want to see improvements in our healthcare system, and that means strengthening the Affordable Care Act," she told students at the University of Chicago's Institute of Politics this week, while adding that she still wants to get to single payer eventually. This is so... It doesn't surprise me at all, because we've seen how Elizabeth Warren has devolved over the past few years, especially over the past 6 months. But right now you have almost 40 million Americans newly unemployed. Most of them now without health insurance that they had tied to their employer. Because America is still this crazy country where you tie health insurance to your employer. Well, many of those people that had their health insurance through their employer no longer have it. So what is expanding the Affordable Care Act going to do when these people can't afford health care? Just to give you some perspective here, I'm in Canada, where we have healthcare guaranteed to us. So if you lost your job, by the way, most people that lost their job because of COVID-19, they can apply to get $2,000 a month. It's called the CERB. It's a benefit right now. You lose your job through COVID-19, you get $2,000 a month. And there's other benefits as well. There's wage subsidies. I don't get into everything. But basically, most, not all, but most Canadians are being taken care of, at least to a much better degree than Americans are, in terms of having actual cash to be able to, say, buy food, pay for bills. But that we have that, and we also have healthcare guaranteed to us. So for Americans right now, I honestly don't know. Or I can't imagine what you're going through in terms of having no money and not being able to afford healthcare in case you're sick. It's such a crazy system. And for Elizabeth Warren to go even further right now, when it's so obvious, it's even more obvious than ever, that Medicare for All is exactly what is needed. I mean, it shows you all she cares about is attaining power, and she will completely compromise any principles she maybe had once that she clearly does not have anymore, but maybe once had. She will compromise all of it just to be able to call herself vice president. And still, I don't think it's going to happen. But we will see. Warren here says, quote, "People want to see improvements to our healthcare system. That means strengthening the Affordable Care Act." And again, this is like the way that she's framing this, and that in the way that people want to see improvements, that means the Affordable Care Act, when every single exit poll of every single state in the Democratic primary backed Medicare-For-All, there is zero data to point out that people want the Affordable Care Act to be strengthened. There is no data out there that supports that. All the data shows people want an actual healthcare system where they don't have to worry about losing their job and losing their healthcare, where they can change jobs, go back to school, do something else, start a business, and have healthcare still guaranteed to them and keep their same doctor and same providers. Because under a single payer system, you all pay into one system. There is no in-network, out-of-network. Your doctor is in every network because it's a single payer system. Your Congress people, the wealthiest people in the country, on the same healthcare system as you. So how bad is it really going to get? Also, from the article here, Warren's been plugging Biden's website and media appearances, and in case her enthusiasm for a Biden presidency wasn't apparent, her team produced a video lauding Biden's implementation of the 2009 stimulus package. Quote, "President Trump doesn't value transparency and accountability," Warren concluded in the recording, "but a President Biden will." Now, obviously, President Trump does not value accountability and transparency. We know that. This is obvious. We all agree. But what evidence is there that a President Biden will value transparency and accountability? I mean, just look at how he's handling the Tara Reade allegations. He said recently he hasn't watched any of the interviews, hasn't read what Tara Reade has actually discussed, hasn't looked at the evidence. That's clearly showing that he is not being held accountable or not being transparent about what's going on. The constant lies with Joe Biden. Go back to the last debate with Bernie Sanders. I did a video on this. In fact, I've done a video on many of Joe Biden's lies. But during the debate, he lied again and again and again on his history on Social Security. Just straight up lied about his positions. In the past 6 months, he's lied about being arrested in South Africa trying to meet Nelson Mandela. Never happened. He lied about his involvement in the civil rights movement, discussing how he was involved in ways that he was never involved. He has lied over and over and over again. And it just apart from the lies, he's been on the wrong side of issues his entire career. And he has not been held accountable for that. But Warren has to say this stuff because she wants to be his vice president. I just think this is, I mean, we all know Joe Biden is the worst possible candidate they could have put up against Donald Trump. And at this point, I mean, this is all these politicians have left to do. When it comes to Bernie Sanders, he has not, when it comes to like his endorsement, he's not pretended to all of a sudden back Joe Biden's policies. No. In fact, it's been the opposite. He has made Joe Biden take steps to at least pretend rhetorically to care in terms of forming their joint task forces. I'm not saying it's going to do anything, but at the very least, Bernie Sanders has not gone completely opposite when it comes to his principles. He's still fighting what he's always fought for. But when it comes to these people like Elizabeth Warren or anybody else trying to become vice president, all they're doing is showing that they really don't care. They really do not care about people. They really don't care about improving the lives of anybody. All they care about is attaining power.